When you think of the word human, you probably picture us, Homo sapiens. But for hundreds of thousands of years, we weren't alone. The story of humanity is far more complex and fascinating than a simple straight line of evolution. It's more like a sprawling family tree with many branches. And one of our closest, most successful, and most misunderstood relatives was the Neanderthal. For a very long time, Neanderthals have had a serious PR problem. The popular image is of a hunched-over, grunting, club-wielding brute, a primitive, less intelligent version of us. A failed experiment on the path to modern humans. But the truth, as revealed by decades of scientific research, is that this stereotype is completely wrong. In fact, Neanderthals were one of the most successful human species ever to walk the earth. They thrived for over 350,000 years, a much longer reign than Homo sapiens has had so far. They spread across a vast territory, from Western Europe all the way to Siberia, adapting to harsh Ice Age climates that would have been incredibly challenging for us. They were survivors, innovators, and in many ways they were just as human as we are. So let's debunk some myths. First, the idea that they were brutish and unintelligent. This couldn't be further from the truth. Neanderthals had brains that were, on average, even larger than ours today. Now, a bigger brain doesn't automatically mean smarter, as brain organization is key, but it certainly shatters the idea of them being simple-minded. Physically, they were powerhouses. Shorter and stockier than most modern humans, with a robust build, powerful muscles, a broad chest, and a pronounced brow ridge. This physique wasn't primitive. It was a brilliant adaptation to the cold. A compact body retains heat more effectively, and their muscular build gave them the strength needed to hunt the massive animals of the Ice Age, like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant deer, and they were expert hunters. We have found Neanderthal hunting spears, perfectly balanced for throwing, and evidence at kill sites shows they were capable of taking down the largest and most dangerous prey. This wasn't just about brute force. It required strategic planning, sophisticated communication, and deep knowledge of their environment and the behavior of the animals they hunted. They were apex predators, at the very top of the food chain. But their humanity wasn't just defined by strength and survival skills. The most compelling evidence against the brute stereotype comes from their culture and social behavior. Neanderthals had a sense of beauty and symbolism. They collected eagle talons and unique shells to make jewelry, and they used mineral pigments like ochre, possibly for body paint or other artistic expressions, long before modern humans were known to do so in Europe. They weren't lone wolves either. They lived in social groups and cared for each other. We have found Neanderthal skeletons with healed, severe injuries, a broken arm, a fractured skull, even blindness. These individuals would not have survived for years without the help of their community. They were fed, protected, and nursed back to health. This is clear evidence of empathy and social cooperation, the very fabric of what we consider to be human society. There's even evidence that Neanderthals buried their dead. While the debate continues about whether these were elaborate ritual burials, the simple act of intentionally placing a body in a grave suggests a complex understanding of life and death and a respect for the members of their group. They weren't just casting their dead aside, they were treating them with care. So, if Neanderthals were so successful, so intelligent, and so well adapted, where did they all go? This is one of the greatest mysteries in human prehistory. They disappear from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago, not long after Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, began migrating into Europe from Africa in larger numbers. For a long time, the leading theory was that we simply outcompeted them. Maybe our social networks were larger, our tools were slightly more advanced, or our adaptability was a bit more flexible, giving us a crucial edge. In this scenario, we either slowly replaced them or, in a darker interpretation, actively wiped them out. Another theory points to climate change. The rapid and extreme climate fluctuations of the last ice age might have been too much for Neanderthal populations, which were already spread thin across a huge area. Perhaps their main food sources dwindled and their populations collapsed before they could adapt. But there is a third, and perhaps more intriguing, possibility. Maybe they didn't completely disappear at all. Maybe they just merged with us. This was once considered a fringe idea, but in 2010, everything changed. Scientists successfully sequenced the Neanderthal genome, a monumental achievement that allowed us to directly compare their DNA with ours. And what they found was astonishing. If your ancestry is from outside of Africa, then you have Neanderthal DNA right now in your cells. On average, people of European and Asian descent have about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genome. It might not sound like a lot, but when you spread that across the billions of people on Earth, it means a significant portion of the Neanderthal genome is still alive and well, just scattered among us. This discovery proves that when Homo sapiens met Neanderthals, it wasn't just a story of competition or conflict. They also interbred. They had children together, and those children became part of the modern human gene pool. We are their living legacy. So what did we inherit from our Neanderthal cousins? Some of this DNA seems to have been incredibly beneficial. Genes related to our immune system, helping us fight off new pathogens we encountered as we moved into new lands, have been traced back to them. Other genes influenced skin and hair traits, possibly helping early modern humans adapt to lower levels of UV light in northern latitudes. Of course, not all the inherited traits were positive. Some Neanderthal gene variants have been linked to a slightly increased risk for things like type 2 diabetes, depression, and certain allergies. These are complex conditions, and Neanderthal DNA is just one tiny factor among many, but it shows how our deep past continues to influence our health today. This genetic inheritance completely changes how we should view Neanderthals. They aren't a failed branch of the human family tree. They are a part of our own story. Their journey didn't end 40,000 years ago. It just took a different path, flowing into the river of our own species. The story of the Neanderthals teaches us that human evolution wasn't a linear march of progress from primitive to advanced. It was a messy, branching bush with many different types of humans coexisting and interacting. We just happen to be the last branch left standing. So the next time you hear someone use Neanderthal as an insult for being primitive or stupid, you can tell them the real story. The story of a resilient, intelligent, and compassionate species that ruled a continent for hundreds of thousands of years. A species that faced down ice ages, hunted mammoths, cared for its sick and elderly, and ultimately lives on within billions of us today. They didn't truly vanish. A part of them survived in us. Ever wondered what a typical day was like for our ancient cousins, the Neanderthals, during the Ice Age? Forget the grunting, brutish stereotypes. Let's travel back in time, about 100,000 years, and step inside a real Neanderthal community. It's a world colder and harsher than ours, filled with giant beasts, but also with warmth, family, and incredible resilience. Picture this, a small, tight-knit group gathered around a crackling hearth. This fire isn't just for warmth. It's the heart of their home. It's where stories are shared, where food is cooked, and where the community bonds. Archaeological sites show us that Neanderthals didn't just wander aimlessly. They had home bases, places they returned to again and again, creating layers of history with each visit. These weren't just temporary camps. They were homes filled with the echoes of daily life. Around the fire, the smell of roasting meat fills the air. But what's on the menu? It's far more diverse than you might think. We often picture them as pure carnivores, hunting massive mammoths and woolly rhinos. And they were definitely skilled hunters, bringing down formidable prey. But that's only part of the story. By analyzing dental plaque and food remains, scientists have discovered a surprisingly varied diet. Alongside the rich, fatty meat that fueled them through the cold, they ate a wide range of plants. We're talking nuts, seeds, wild grasses, and even cooked grains like barley. It seems they understood the landscape intimately, knowing what was edible, what was medicinal, and when to harvest it. They even seasoned their food with herbs, showing a level of culinary sophistication we rarely give them credit for. They weren't just surviving. They were dining. This ability to exploit their environment came from incredible ingenuity. Let's talk about their technology. The Neanderthals were masters of the Mousterian toolkit. This wasn't just about banging rocks together. It was a sophisticated method of shaping flint and other stones to create a variety of specialized tools. They would carefully prepare a core stone and then strike off sharp, precise flakes. These flakes were then turned into everything they needed: sharp points for spears to hunt large game, scrapers to prepare animal hides for clothing and shelter, and knives for butchering meat and cutting plants. Each tool was perfectly designed for its purpose. Think of it like a prehistoric Swiss Army knife with a different tool for every task. They could even produce a sticky glue from birch bark, a complex process that required heating the bark without oxygen. They used this adhesive to attach stone points to wooden shafts, creating powerful and reliable hunting spears. This wasn't primitive. This was advanced engineering for its time. Life, however, was incredibly tough. The skeletal remains of Neanderthals tell a story of a physically demanding and dangerous existence. Many individuals show signs of severe injuries, broken bones, head trauma, and debilitating arthritis. Their injury patterns are often compared to modern rodeo riders, which gives you a sense of the close-quarters, high-risk encounters they had with large, powerful animals. A hunt could easily go wrong, leaving a community member badly wounded. But here's where the story gets truly human. Many of these individuals didn't die from their injuries. Instead, their bones show signs of healing, sometimes over many years. A person with a broken arm or a crushed foot couldn't hunt, forage, or even defend themselves. They would have been completely dependent on others. This is powerful evidence of care and compassion. It means that the group didn't abandon their wounded. They fed them, protected them, and nursed them back to health. One famous example is the Old Man of Shanidar, an individual who lived to a relatively old age despite having a withered arm, being partially blind, and suffering from other debilitating injuries from a young age. His survival for decades would have been impossible without the constant support of his community. This level of care points to deep social and emotional bonds. These weren't just alliances of convenience. They were families. They felt empathy, they formed friendships, and they understood the value of every single member of their group. Living in a world full of cave bears, giant lions, and relentless cold, cooperation wasn't a luxury, it was the fundamental key to survival. Every member of the community had a role to play. The hunters who brought back meat, the gatherers who provided essential plant nutrients, the toolmakers who crafted the instruments of survival, and the caregivers who tended to the young, the old, and the injured. Each person's contribution was vital. Sharing resources wasn't just a nice idea. It was the system that ensured the group's continued existence. When a hunt was successful, the entire community shared in the bounty. When times were lean, they weathered the hardship together. Their behavioral ecology was shaped by this constant pressure. They had to be smart, adaptable, and above all cooperative. They likely communicated in complex ways to coordinate hunts, share knowledge about the landscape, and pass down skills from one generation to the next. The image of the lone, brutish caveman couldn't be further from the truth. The real story of the Neanderthals is one of community, of intelligence, and of a deep, human-like capacity for caring for one another in the face of incredible adversity. So the next time you think of the Ice Age, don't just picture a frozen wasteland. Picture a Neanderthal family huddled around a fire, sharing a diverse meal cooked with care. Picture skilled artisans crafting tools with precision and purpose. And picture a community bound by loyalty and compassion, proving that even in the harshest of worlds, the most powerful tool for survival is each other. What if I told you that everything you think you know about Neanderthals is wrong? Forget the brutish, club-wielding caveman stereotype. We're going on a journey deep into the past to uncover the surprisingly complex and artistic mind of our closest extinct relatives. And it all starts with fire. For a long time, we saw Neanderthal fire pits as nothing more than ancient barbecues, a place for cooking and keeping warm. But new evidence is painting a much richer picture. Imagine a group of Neanderthals gathered around a crackling hearth, not just for survival, but for connection. The flickering light pushes back the immense darkness of the Ice Age, and in its glow, stories are told. Skills are passed down and social bonds are forged. Fire wasn't just a tool. It was the heart of their community, a social organizer that brought them together. It was the first stage where the drama of their lives played out. Think about what happens around a campfire today. We share, we laugh, we connect. It's a primal experience. For Neanderthals, this was their nightly ritual. The hearth was a place of safety, a place of learning, and a place where a complex social world came to life. This single element, the controlled use of fire, hints at a mind capable of planning, community, and something much deeper than mere instinct. And this planning is on full display when we look at their tools. We're not talking about simple, sharpened rocks. We're talking about the Mouse-Tyrian industry, a sophisticated tool-making technique that required a deep understanding of materials and a clear mental blueprint. A Neanderthal couldn't just whack two rocks together and hope for the best. They had to select the right kind of flint, prepare the core stone with a series of precise strikes, and then, with one final expert blow, detach a perfect flake, a sharp, versatile tool ready for use. This process, known as the Levallois technique, is like a form of prehistoric engineering. It shows they could think in steps, visualize a finished product before they even started, and execute a complex plan. This isn't just about intelligence. It's about teaching and learning. These skills weren't encoded in their DNA. They had to be passed from one generation to the next. Picture a seasoned toolmaker guiding a younger member of the group, demonstrating the right angle, the right amount of force. This is culture in action. The tools they left behind are not just artifacts. They are fossilized ideas, evidence of a mind that could plan, innovate, and educate. But perhaps the most profound window into the Neanderthal mind comes from the way they treated their dead. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and La Chapelle aux Saints in France, we found bodies that were deliberately buried. This is a monumental leap in behavior. Animals die and are left where they fall, but these Neanderthals took the time to dig a grave and place their companions within it. Why? Was it simple hygiene? Or was it something more? Some of these burials contain intriguing clues. At Shanidar, one individual was buried with clumps of pollen from colorful wildflowers. Was this an accidental inclusion, or was it a deliberate offering, a final, beautiful gesture for a lost loved one? An early form of flower power? Another skeleton of an older Neanderthal who had suffered debilitating injuries throughout his life shows he was cared for by his group for years. He couldn't have survived alone. This speaks volumes about their capacity for empathy and social responsibility. These burials challenge us to consider that Neanderthals experienced grief and had a sense of connection that transcended life itself. To bury someone is to acknowledge their absence, to give them a place in memory. It suggests the beginnings of ritual, the dawn of a spiritual or symbolic way of thinking about the world and our place in it. They weren't just disposing of a body. They were commemorating a life. For decades, the story of human evolution had a clear hero, Homo sapiens. We were the ones who invented art, symbolism, and abstract thought. Neanderthals were often portrayed as a cognitive dead end, but this narrative is crumbling. In caves across Spain, we've found paintings that predate the arrival of modern humans in Europe by thousands of years. We're talking about simple but powerful symbols, hand stencils, dots, and lines painted in brilliant red ochre. One of the most stunning examples is a ladder-like shape painted deep within a Spanish cave. Geochemical dating tells us it's over 64,000 years old. At that time, the only humans in Europe were Neanderthals. This wasn't just idle doodling. To make these paintings, they had to source and grind pigments, create a binder, and carry torches deep into the pitch-black, dangerous cave systems to find a suitable canvas. This is a deliberate, planned, and symbolic act. They were marking their world, communicating an idea. They were creating art. What did these symbols mean? We may never know for sure. But their existence alone is revolutionary. It proves that the capacity for symbolic thought, for creating a world of meaning beyond the purely functional, was not exclusive to our species. Neanderthals also looked at a blank wall and saw a canvas. They also felt the urge to leave a mark to say, "I was here." We've also found eagle talons and seashells that were perforated, polished, and possibly worn as pendants or ornaments. These objects have no practical purpose. Their only function is symbolic. They are personal adornments, expressions of identity or status. Just like we might wear a necklace or a special watch today, Neanderthals were using objects to communicate something about themselves. This fundamentally changes our understanding of who they were. The line we've drawn between us and them is becoming increasingly blurry. They had fire-centered communities. They engineered sophisticated tools. They cared for their sick and elderly. They mourned and buried their dead, and they descended into darkness to create art. These are not the actions of a simple-minded beast. These are the hallmarks of a conscious, reflective, and deeply human mind. So we have to ask ourselves a new question. Not were Neanderthals intelligent, but how was their intelligence different from our own? Their world was likely just as rich with meaning, stories, and social complexity as that of their Homo sapiens contemporaries. They weren't a failed experiment waiting for us to replace them. They were a parallel path of humanity, a different way of being human. The more we discover, the more we realize that the qualities we once thought were uniquely our own creativity, empathy, symbolic thought have much deeper roots. We are not the sole proprietors of the human spirit. The Neanderthal mind was not a void, but a rich, vibrant landscape of thought and emotion. By looking at their art, their tools, and their fires, we get a glimpse into that lost world, and in doing so, we see a reflection of ourselves. The story of humanity is far more complex and beautiful than we ever imagined. Have you ever wondered if we weren't always the only humans on Earth? Imagine a world about 50,000 years ago where our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, were not alone. Another human species, the Neanderthals, also roamed the vast landscapes of Europe and Asia. For thousands of years, these two groups shared the planet. What happened when they met? Was it war, or was it something far more complex and fascinating? Let's journey back in time to uncover one of the greatest mysteries of human history, the epic story of us and the Neanderthals. 50,000 years ago, our ancestors began migrating out of Africa in greater numbers, pushing into territories that had been home to Neanderthals for hundreds of thousands of years. This wasn't a sudden invasion, but a slow, creeping expansion, family by family, group by group. For the Neanderthals, who were already adapted to the colder climates of Eurasia, the arrival of these slender newcomers must have been a momentous event. They weren't just encountering another animal. They were meeting a different kind of human. Think about that for a moment. Two intelligent, tool-using, social hominin species looking at each other for the first time. The questions are endless. Did they see each other as rivals? As kin? Or as something completely alien? The old picture, often shown in movies and books, is one of brutal conflict. A story where the smarter, more advanced Homo sapiens simply wiped out their supposedly brutish cousins. But the archaeological and genetic evidence paints a much more nuanced and interesting picture. It wasn't a simple story of us versus them. It was a story of coexistence, competition, and even cooperation that spanned millennia. Instead of a quick, violent replacement, imagine a long, drawn-out period where these two populations lived side by side, their territories overlapping. They would have seen each other's campfires in the distance, followed the same animal herds, and gathered plants from the same valleys. So how did they interact? Let's start with competition. Both species were apex predators, hunting large game like mammoths, bison, and deer. They needed vast territories to support their groups, so resources were always a key factor. As climate patterns shifted and the Ice Age environment fluctuated, food and habitable land would have become scarcer. In this scenario, competition was inevitable. There might have been skirmishes over prime hunting grounds or a prized cave. It's logical to assume that the larger population and potentially more efficient social networks of Homo sapiens gave them a competitive edge over time. Our ancestors might have been better at adapting to changing conditions, pushing Neanderthals into more marginal, resource-poor areas. But it wasn't all conflict. There's growing evidence for cultural exchange. Archaeologists have found sophisticated tools, personal ornaments like shell beads, and the use of pigments in Neanderthal sites, dating to the period when they were in contact with Homo sapiens. Some researchers argue that Neanderthals developed these innovations on their own. Others suggest they might have learned from or been inspired by their new neighbors. Imagine a young Neanderthal watching a Homo sapiens group from a distance, seeing them use a new type of spear thrower, or noticing the intricate patterns they carved into bone. Knowledge could have been transferred not through formal teaching, but through observation, imitation, or even the exchange of objects. This wasn't a one-way street either. Neanderthals had survived in Ice Age Europe for a very long time. They knew the land, the seasons, and the animals intimately. It's entirely possible that our ancestors learned valuable survival skills from them, like which local plants were medicinal or how to best hunt in the frigid north. And now for the most intimate part of their story, interbreeding. This is perhaps the most powerful evidence against the simple conflict narrative. The proof is right inside our own DNA. If your ancestry is from outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you likely have between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in your genome. This isn't a random accident. It's a genetic echo of encounters that happened tens of thousands of years ago. It means that at some point, a Homo sapiens and a Neanderthal met, saw each other as partners, and had children together. And those children were integrated into Homo sapiens society, passing their mixed heritage down through countless generations, all the way to us today. This genetic legacy is incredible. It's a direct biological link to another human species. These weren't just isolated events. Genetic analysis suggests that interbreeding happened on multiple occasions across different times and places. This tells us that the social barrier between the two groups was not absolute. They were able to recognize each other as fellow humans, capable of forming the most personal of bonds. What did these encounters look like? We can only speculate. Perhaps it was a lone individual being accepted into a new group, or entire communities forming alliances and exchanging members. Whatever the social context, the result is undeniable. A part of the Neanderthals never went extinct. It lives on, woven into the very fabric of our being. The genes we inherited from Neanderthals weren't just silent passengers, either. Some of them were actually beneficial. Scientists have found that certain Neanderthal genes are related to our immune system, helping our ancestors fight off new pathogens they encountered as they moved into Europe and Asia. Other genes are linked to our skin's response to ultraviolet radiation and our ability to adapt to colder climates. In a very real way, the Neanderthals helped our species adapt and thrive in new environments. It's a profound thought. Their ancient resilience became part of our own. So if they didn't just get wiped out in a war, what did happen to the Neanderthals? Why did they disappear as a distinct species around 40,000 years ago? The answer is likely a combination of factors. A slow-motion extinction event rather than a sudden catastrophe. First, climate change played a huge role. The period when Neanderthals vanished was marked by rapid and extreme climate fluctuations. This would have put immense pressure on the animal and plant resources they relied on, leading to population stress and fragmentation. Their numbers were already low to begin with, and they lived in small, isolated groups. A series of bad winters or a decline in their primary prey could have been devastating. Second, the ever-present competition from arriving Homo sapiens groups can't be ignored. Even without direct, widespread violence, our ancestors likely had a demographic advantage. They may have had slightly higher birth rates or lower infant mortality, allowing their populations to grow and recover from hardships more quickly. Over thousands of years, even a small 1% advantage in population growth could lead to one group completely replacing another. Homo sapiens may have simply outcompeted and absorbed the smaller, more fragmented Neanderthal population. And this brings us back to interbreeding. It's possible that assimilation was the final chapter of the Neanderthal story. As their populations dwindled and became more isolated, their members may have been increasingly absorbed into the much larger and more successful Homo sapiens groups. So they didn't just vanish, they merged. Their gene pool was diluted into a much larger one until they no longer existed as a distinct population. In this sense, it was a form of extinction by assimilation. They disappeared, but they also became part of us. The story of our encounter with the Neanderthals is a humbling one. It reminds us that our own species' success wasn't guaranteed, and that the path of human evolution was not a straight line, but a complex, branching river. For a time, the world was home to multiple kinds of intelligent, tool-using humans. The Neanderthals weren't a failed experiment or an evolutionary dead end. They were a successful and adaptable species that thrived for hundreds of thousands of years through dramatic climate changes. Their ultimate fate was sealed by a combination of a changing world and the arrival of a new, closely related, and highly successful humanity. The next time you look in the mirror, remember that you are looking at a face that carries a faint, ancient echo of another kind of human. Our DNA holds the final chapter of the Neanderthal story, a story not just of extinction, but of connection, adaptation, and a shared legacy that continues to shape who we are today. It's a powerful reminder that the story of humanity is richer, stranger, and far more interconnected than we ever imagined. Ever looked in the mirror and wondered what secrets your DNA holds? What if I told you that a part of you isn't just ancient, but from an entirely different kind of human? For most of us with roots outside of Africa, a small but significant percentage of our DNA, about 1 to 4%, comes from Neanderthals. That's right, the so-called cavemen from our prehistoric past never truly vanished. They live on, inside of us. For decades, we saw Neanderthals as our evolutionary inferiors, a failed branch of the human family tree that simply went extinct. But the story science tells us now is far more complex and fascinating. Thanks to the incredible work of geneticists who managed to sequence the Neanderthal genome from ancient bones, we discovered something shocking. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, didn't just meet Neanderthals. They had children with them. This happened thousands of years ago, as modern humans migrated out of Africa and encountered Neanderthal populations that had lived in Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. So what does this sliver of Neanderthal DNA actually do? It's not just a useless fossil in our cells. It's active, and it influences who we are today in surprisingly tangible ways. One of the biggest areas of influence is our immune system. As our ancestors moved into new environments, they faced new diseases and pathogens. Neanderthals, having lived in those regions for millennia, had already adapted. By interbreeding, our ancestors got a genetic starter pack, a quick upgrade to their immune defenses. Some of the genes we inherited from Neanderthals help our bodies recognize and fight off specific viruses and bacteria. So the next time you fight off a cold, you might have a Neanderthal to thank for that extra bit of resilience. But the inheritance doesn't stop there. It's woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. Take a look at your hair and skin. Certain Neanderthal genes are linked to traits like skin pigmentation and hair type. Scientists theorize that these genes might have helped our ancestors adapt to different levels of sunlight in northern latitudes. Lighter skin, for instance, is better at producing vitamin D in regions with less sun. So that specific shade of your skin or the texture of your hair could be a direct echo of our ancient relatives' long journey. Even our metabolism and how we process nutrients are touched by this legacy. Some Neanderthal gene variants are associated with how our bodies handle fats and sugars. While these might have been advantageous in a feast or famine world, helping store energy efficiently, today, in our world of abundance, they're sometimes linked to things like type 2 diabetes. It is a classic example of a genetic trait that was once a survival tool becoming a liability in a modern context. It really makes you think about how our bodies are still trying to navigate a world they were entirely built for. And what about our sleep? You know that feeling of being a night owl or an early bird? Our circadian rhythm, our internal body clock, is fundamental to our health. Researchers have found that certain Neanderthal gene variants are associated with being a morning person. This makes perfect sense. In ancient times, being able to wake up early and sync your activities with the daylight hours would have been a huge advantage for hunting and gathering. So, if you're the type who springs out of bed at dawn, you might be channeling your inner Neanderthal. Beyond the purely physical, can we speculate about the psychological echoes? This is where things get really interesting, though we have to tread carefully as it's harder to prove. Think about how we handle stress. Neanderthal life was incredibly tough, a constant struggle for survival against predators, harsh climates, and scarcity. It's plausible that genes related to our fight or flight response were shaped during this time. Could some of our modern anxieties and stress responses be a holdover from a time when hypervigilance was a key to staying alive? What about creativity? We often think of art and symbolism as a uniquely Homo sapiens trait, but archaeological discoveries are challenging this idea. We've found evidence of Neanderthals using pigments, creating jewelry from eagle talons, and possibly even engaging in symbolic burial practices. They weren't just brutish survivalists. They had a capacity for abstract thought. Is it possible that the intermingling of our lineages created a new kind of cognitive flexibility, a fusion of different ways of seeing and interacting with the world? It's a tantalizing idea that the creative spark in us might have been fanned by this ancient union. All of this genetic and archaeological evidence forces us to completely redefine what we mean by extinction. The Neanderthals didn't just die out and disappear. A more accurate way to see it is that they were absorbed. Their population was much smaller than the incoming wave of modern humans. And over time, their distinct gene pool was diluted into ours. They became part of us. Their legacy isn't one of failure, but of integration. Their story merged with our own. This reframes our entire understanding of human identity. We're not the sole triumphant lineage that outcompeted all others. We are a mosaic, a composite being. Our species is a blend of different hominin lineages. Not just Neanderthals, but also another mysterious group called the Denisovans, who left their genetic mark primarily in the people of Asia and Oceania. Our family tree is less of a straight line and more of a tangled, interconnected web. Thinking about the Neanderthal within us is a profound and humbling experience. It reminds us that our definition of human has always been more fluid than we thought. It connects us to a deeper, more ancient past, showing that evolution isn't a simple ladder of progress but a complex dance of interaction, adaptation, and shared legacy. We carry the history of our entire human family within ourselves. The story of Homo sapiens is not one of singular triumph, but of a shared journey. And the next time you look in the mirror, remember, you're looking at a survivor, an innovator, and a small, but real piece of a world that vanished tens of thousands of years ago. Thanks for joining me on this journey into our ancient past. If you found this fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into what it means to be human. See you in the next one.